took over, and he called his platform Reform Movement. For 5 years, he would promise that there would be reform and bring about 5% from the reformer into the government, and then 95% part of his party, and then a year later we'll put him in jail and prison, and repeated this for many years. Now his son took over illegally, did the same thing. In 2000, he promised, nothing happened. In 2000, promised the Kurds, nothing happened. And recently, these many promises he made, so that the behavior is always promising, they don't deliver, all they do in the fine time. Now is the time, for the sake of the world, peace and democracy and the Syrian people. We need to support the Syrian revolution, and we need to support the democratic group. And if you were to look at Syria, not everybody's Muslim Brotherhood, but this is what the regime wants you to believe. This is the only excuse, devil you know better than devil you don't know. Obviously, yes, Iran and Turkey and Saudis and many countries have influence by promoting some Islamists in Syria. Well, this is the West, and America can now support the democratic groups as well, such as my friend here, such as our groups as well, to where we have Christians, Druze, Alawi, Kurd, every sect from the Syrian society are present. This is what we want from the West to support us. This is the alternative. This is the real partner for peace and democracy. And as one of my friends mentioned, that if we were to give Golan and a golden platter to Assad, he would want to accept that peace process with Israel, because they want to keep this excuse to oppress their people, Syrian people, and they don't want peace. Now is the time for Israelis, for Americans, for the West, everybody to realize supporting democracy and supporting democratic group to counter the Islamist way and to counter the regime agenda. This is the only way, the right way, and this is how we can kill two birds with one stone by pushing Iran back and unarming Hezbollah and giving Lebanon sovereignty and making a peace deal with Israel. I think this is what the Syrian people want, and at the end of the day, most Syrian people just like want a job, take care of their family, and have peace. And this is our right, our duty really to support them. And we, frankly, last few minutes of this basically ask you to really help in pushing the bill. And if you guys can, suggest idea to people we work for, we push a bill, Syrian Democracy Act, or some kind of bill that we need to really put pressure on the Syrian regime and support the democratic group, not the so-called democratic group, but obviously Islamist, and being supported by State Department and other groups as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the very comments. I'd like to open it up for Q&A.
I'm Archbishop from the Syrian Church in New Jersey. I find this serious contribution. I failed to hear. I come from the same town.
Could you speak louder, please?
Yes, I'm the Archbishop of the Syrian Church in New Jersey. I come from the same town like Mr. Abbas from Kanishni, Mesopotamia, and I was surprised to hear that it's a Kurdish region. Syriac people are been there for thousands of years. They live together in peace with other components of the Syrian society. However, that's not the issue today. Of course, the numbers are, again, not what we know. Anyway, I failed to hear from the three speakers. By the way, I share with them that we have serious crisis. Of course, we need to do something to reform. But I failed to hear from them what is the process, what are the guarantees. I mean, looking at Iraq and Egypt, it doesn't give me any peace of mind. Seeing our people being killed there after the toppling of Saddam and Mubarak, persecution of Christians continue. And who can say that the Muslim Brotherhood will not take over? Who can say that Christians will not be killed and other minorities? And who can say that the situation will be better for us than it is now? Thank you.
Thanks very much for your comment. You'd have to set the bar pretty low to judge the Bashar al-Assad regime's behavior, both domestically and regionally, as even remotely in the interests of the United States. I spent 7 years there. I engaged that regime personally, including its first lady and her charities. Everybody has good ideas in that country, but the problem is that the system itself is going through failure. It is unable to accommodate the wishes of its people, and that's not because. And when I was speaking earlier about concerning the minority regime, it is not all minorities in the country, and as you pointed out, you can be from the same village, but you can be from different origins. I'm not going to get into, though, who was living there first. I wouldn't even dare get into anything like that. It is important to note and to pay attention to minority rights inside of and protecting minorities inside of Syria as this transition unfolds. Unfortunately, in such transitions, there are no guarantees. And even during that time, what I would suggest, I mean, it's very difficult to know what to do, because I would particularly point you to the behavior of the Shabiha forces, the irregular forces, or ghosts, which are, in some areas are made up of Alawites, but not only Alawites who report to the Assad regime. They are starting to stoke the sectarian coals, which sets us into a very dangerous situation. What I would suggest is that we ask those parties who would like to take over after a transition, very bluntly, what are your guarantees for minority rights inside of Syria? It's a perfectly reasonable thing to ask, and my conversations with these groups tell me that they are willing to give guarantees. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to be safe in a transition. No, it will be chaotic. But I think it's important for us to push them and to say very clearly to them, what is it that you're willing to do to protect minority rights? It wouldn't be a Sunni-dominated government that would take over. It might be a Sunni-led government, but it should have representation from everyone in Syria and should represent minority rights as well as those of the majority. And it's very important we press upon them that this should be a key part of any transition. I think that's going on from the U.S. government standpoint at the moment, and I think you'll continue to see that as things unfold.
If I could just add one thing, I think that there's no doubt that I believe the history of Syria is full, rich with diversity and the intermingling of various faiths. And I remember my grandfather telling me about Aleppo, where he did constant business with the Jewish community in Aleppo and the Christian community. And if you look now, there's hardly any Jews left in Aleppo from what I hear. So the current situation is not one of religious freedom or religious diversity. And I understand your concern, but I do think that if they're going to grow into maturing into a vibrant community that respects religious freedom, the current toxic environment is actually doing the opposite. It's creating hateful, anti-Semitic, anti-Western, very sectarian environment because of the evil nature of the government. It is creating this environment. I understand your concern, but I do think Andrew laid it out well, which is we need to create, if you create coalitions of the minorities, they will outnumber that majority you're worried about in Syria. Because within the Sunni community, there are secularists, there are those that believe in the separation of mosque and state, and the Brotherhood itself is a plurality, but it's not a majority of the Sunni community. And you put that with the other minorities, and you've got a government that would never be taken over by Islamists.
I kind of agree with my friend here that Middle East, obviously, many people went there from Assyrian, Chaldean, Syriac, Kurds. They lived there for many, many thousands of years. There's no question about this. The issues here, in terms of Islam has taken over, Muslim Brotherhood and everybody else, what I hear is obviously keeping the regime is the only way to protect the minorities, our Christians. I disagree with that. I think in the long run, this regime will be gone. The question, the question shouldn't be if this regime will continue, this dynasty. The end is very near. The question, how many people is going to kill and what type of violence will come afterward. What we need to do is be proactive. Minorities, for example, Assyrian, Chaldean, Kurds, Christian, Syriac, Druze, Alawis, everybody else, and the Sunni, secular, the moderate, the liberals. We need to stick together and build a bloc. This is a democracy partner and bring Syria, look democratic, the rights of everybody. For example, in area you mentioned, why there's area where you have Syriani or Assyrian, they should have the rights to put their own people in government, vote just like U.S., have their own representative, not appointed by Damascus. They should have their own cultural rights. They should have their own autonomies. This is the true form of democracy. This is what we're asking for, and this is the only mechanism to stop Muslim Brotherhood from taking over. If we make it centralized, the Muslim Brotherhood will run over. It will basically try to melt every single ethnic, religious and non-religious and minority groups will be melted to become a Muslim Brotherhood or whatever their agenda is. And this is a major concern. I mean, we need to stick together. We are the real partner with the European, with the American, with the West, and frankly, we don't get this support. And this is a major concern. Now it's a time we put the pressure and get the support that there is an alternative. It's not just Muslim Brotherhood or the regime. There are Syrian people who want to live in peace, and let's give democracy and let them rule themselves. This is all we're asking for. Thank you.
I had a question for you. You mentioned it was not a fracture between the military and regimes in this case, and I'm wondering if you could draw a differentiation between this country and what happened in why they just as a model or this.
It's a very good question. Sorry, he said that concerning the military, the issue of the military and the regime, why couldn't the Syrian regime look to the example of Iran and simply as a model to emulate to survive this crisis? Well, they already are, in the sense that they're already using, I think you've seen the statements from the administration, which have talked about Iranian involvement in suppressing the crackdown. That specifically means technology that's involved in internet monitoring and a number of other things, which are not public. And they've also sanctioned the IRGC Quds Force as a result of that. So they already are looking to them in terms of technical assistance, so to speak, and technology. In terms, though, of a security strategy, yes, you could deploy the Basij, and they have used the Shabiha in the same way. Although the Basij, I think, is a much more organized force and one with a longer history inside of Iran. But the difference, though, for the Assads is that their chances of holding on are much less because it is the base of the regime is so narrow. It's not just the fact that it's an Alawite regime. It's not. It's an Alawite-dominated regime. It's a regime that's dominated by some Alawites, as well as a number of others. It has a narrow base, and it has an increasingly narrower base as a result of some of that Sunni support which is broken off. So, unlike Iran, Syria is really a mosaic. And like any mosaic, and I have a couple of mosaics I picked up when I was in Syria, none of which are historical, by the way, or new. Pieces break off, they crumble away. And so, at a certain time, let's put it this way, the chances for fractures go up. That's why the regime is so obsessed with maintaining the discipline of the regime itself, and why they're so brutal to use fear in a very powerful and malicious way. And of course, then last but not least, the regime's ability to use the regional conspiracy foreign interference card. In the case of Iran and Syria, I think each regime uses it equally to their benefit. I don't think the Syrian people, though, are going to buy it. Some people do buy into it, but I don't think the Syrian people in the end will buy into it. We'll have to wait and see.
After the invasion of Iraq, one of the main criticisms of American policy was forced debathization, that sort of purged even the bureaucracy that didn't have ties directly to the regime but were part of the party for their own professional ambitions, essentially. that harmed organizational sort of knowledge and capabilities. Dr. Josser said that there will be no moderation without the ousting of the Ba'ath Party. Do you think that means all levels of bureaucracy need to be purged of Ba'ath Party members, even if they're not directly tied to Assad? And do you think that it would be amenable for the people of Syria after the regime to allow Ba'athist Party members and Ba'athists to stay in the bureaucracy to run the government in the transition?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think Egypt is dealing with some of this too, with figuring out what to do with the NDP there. I think ultimately, remember, when you talk about party membership, they're either card-carrying members or they're ideological members. The key is to figure that out, and that's really hard to do unless you have an open system. And I think that's really what, typically, the highest level leadership are going to be ideological. Those are the ones that are going to be no-brainers that they have to go. As far as the middle level ones are going to be the most complicated. The staffers, the lower levels, most of those, as I mentioned, are card-carrying because they want to have a job, they want to feed their family. They didn't really join the Ba'ath Party because they believed in their platform, but they just needed a job. So ultimately, this is why, I mean, one of my concerns in Egypt is elections can't happen that quickly. You need time. And especially the one, if it happens quickly, the Islamists end up benefiting because they've been organized underground, while the other seculars, the moderates, have not been organizing in Syria. They've had a 40-year paralysis. So if you're going to have a new grouping of ideologues that can combat the leftists, the Baathists, and a lot of these other groups that have been living in this political nuclear winter, you're going to need to give them time. And I think ultimately in a free system, this is why you need some monitors involved, but ultimately as you flush out these ideas, you can defeat them openly and you'll be able to expose who the ideological Baathists are, and that's how to get rid of them. But pure de-Baathification, I think, is not a wise thing, especially when you have such a high percentage in the military.
Can I add one point? In Syria, when you look at the Ba'ath, really they do not control the power, mostly the family. And all it is just a way of trying to deceive people. In reality, most Syrian people know that, and most Ba'ath card-carrying member as well, they're tired of it. They're just looking for another card, whoever the next card will be given to them. Thanks.
My question, the debate or the talk, the full democracy, full freedom talk now is how we help Syrian people against their oppressive government. When I start hearing more, the Syrian people, we all know already suffer physically, psychologically, economically. So when I start hearing about economic sanction and fighting, that it could increase their suffering. So what are some things, other things we can do to help us keep away from economic sanctions that are various?
You could go to the United Nations, but unfortunately we're being blocked. You go to the UN Human Rights Council, you can say something about that, but you can get blocked there too. You could go to the Arab League, but I don't know if you saw their most recent statement. They ain't looking good. You could go to the Turks, who have the same concerns we do, most definitely, but unfortunately are kind of playing their cards close to their chest. Understandably so. If I bordered Syria, I'd be worried, and had a very long border with Syria, I'd be worried about what the Syrian regime would do to me, what kind of forces would run for that country. We could, I think, very appropriately, apart from sanctions, and by the way, I don't advocate throwing the book at Syria. I agree with you. I think targeting the Syrian people as a whole was wrong. Targeting energy makes sense. An all-out targeting on the Syrian economy, to me, does not make sense at this point. The most important thing is that this regime, like all regimes of this type, doesn't